Good afternoon. My name is Parker Goosey. I'm a principal here at Triangle Insights Group. I've been working in strategy consulting within the life science space for coming up on 9 years now. Within Triangle Insights, I head up our new product planning strategic arc, also heavily involved in the commercial assessment and due diligence strategic arc. Over the course of the last 9 years, gained a lot of experience across a number of different therapeutic areas. Of course, quite a bit of experience within the oncology space and conducting commercial assessments, similar to the assessment that we conducted for Race Oncology for Zantrene. The other leadership team members that were heavily involved throughout the engagement were Chris Appolito and Ben Bonifant, both of them with over 20 years of experience within strategy consulting for pharmaceutical companies. So combined overall 50 years plus of experience across the leadership team that was involved within the assessment for Zantrene. Just to provide a bit of background on Triangle Insights Group as a whole, we are a pure play strategy consulting firm within the pharmaceutical life science space, really providing services to biotech companies, to large pharmaceutical companies, private equity companies, really spans the whole gamut in terms of the stakeholders that we engage with. And overall, we've engaged with over 190 unique life science clients. Across those clients, we've conducted over 900 engagements since the company's founding in 2013, and really proud of that 9.4 out of 10 score in terms of client satisfaction. So after every engagement, we'll reach out to our clients to understand what we did well, what we could do better, and just overall what their perspectives were on the performance of the team throughout the engagement. So really proud of that 9.4 overall satisfaction rating. Now, in terms of the offerings for Triangle Insights Group, we do provide services across the full life cycle of a drug, from early stages of development all the way through inline products and everything in between. But we typically think of our services in a couple of different centers of excellence, if you will, really divided between kind of functional depth and our domain expertise. So similar to the assessment that we did for Zantrene as a cardioprotective and anti-cancer therapeutic, we do a lot of work for diligence and commercial assessments, whether that's buy side or sell side, or even just prioritization of pipelines for large pharmaceutical organizations that are looking to prioritize those assets that they have in development. In addition to the diligence and commercial assessments, the other two functional domains of excellence that we break our business into at a high level is new product planning, whether that's patient segmentation, patient journey, material testing for marketing, etc. And then the last bucket that we split our functional depth into is pricing and market access. So really understanding, what are the implications of potential pricing for a therapeutic? What could utilization management look like for a therapeutic at given price points? Are there certain payer accounts that we would want to target for a therapeutic that's getting ready to launch? So within the assessment for Zantrene, very much combining the pricing and market access expertise as well as the commercial assessment expertise that the team has developed over the course of the last 10 years. Now, in terms of the commercial assessments, we have conducted over 200 commercial assessments across various therapeutic areas. I would say approximately 25, probably greater than 25% of our business is within the oncology space or autoimmune space. Typically, our business really follows the pipeline of therapeutics that are being developed just broadly within the life science space. The two other domains of expertise that we typically highlight are cell and gene therapy, as well as CNS, two other areas in which we have a heavy foothold in conducting assessments like this, providing strategic guidance for other aspects of a product's launch or preparation for launch. The other thing that I wanted to highlight here is really the leadership, the thought leadership on the bottom right-hand portion of this slide. We think it's important to work with leaders of the industry to understand the trends that are culminating at a macro level, and wanting to really be involved in understanding those trends and putting out thought leadership pieces on the implications of some of the trends within the market overall. I'll go into a bit more depth in a moment here as to the project approach and the actual findings related to the assessment for Zantrene, but first wanted to just provide some background on Triangle Insights Group as a whole. Great. Well, before I get into the detailed findings of the commercial assessment for Zantrene, I did want to provide some context as to the overall project approach that we took, which is really a five-pronged approach. Really starting with defining what the key strategic questions were collaboratively with the race oncology team to identify what information we would need to know and fill in order to understand what the total opportunity for Zantrene may be, both as a cardioprotective therapeutic as well as an anti-cancer agent. Once we defined those key strategic questions, we really moved into the phase of conducting quite a bit of desk research, really understanding each of these individual oncology markets in terms of the overall size of the population, the use of anthracyclines and where they fit within the treatment paradigm, understanding the analog drug pricing for similar therapeutics, both supportive care therapeutics as well as anti-cancer therapeutics, as well as taking a look at the competitive pipeline to really understand, for these novel therapeutics that are in development, what sort of impact they may have on the use of anthracyclines. All topics which I'll provide some perspectives on in a moment here. But once we had garnered a baseline understanding of each of these markets, we moved into conducting stakeholder research with a variety of different stakeholders, including payers, physicians, key opinion leaders, to really understand, again, what are the unmet needs associated with the use of anthracyclines, how might Zantrene fit into the treatment paradigm, and what could the overall pricing and adoption of the therapeutic look like. All of this really culminated into the development of a base case forecast for Zantrene under various development scenarios as a cardioprotective therapeutic, as a cardioprotective and anti-cancer oncolytic therapeutic as well, to really understand what are the bounds of the opportunity given our expectations for the performance of Zantrene. And I'll provide a bit more context as to the detailed findings of the project in a moment here, but I did want to provide a bit more perspective on the individuals that we spoke to within the research. You'll see on the left-hand portion of this slide, we did want to include a number of thought leaders within the space. And these discussions were particularly helpful in really defining what specific forms of cancer have the highest unmet need or the greatest unmet need for a therapeutic like Zantrene, which could provide both cardioprotective benefits as well as potentially anti-cancer benefits. We also included a total of 20 oncologist discussions. 12 of those were more focused on breast cancer itself, as well as the inclusion of 8 gynecologic oncologists. And then you'll see on the bottom here, wanting to include a number of different payers as well. So we included 6 payer discussions with MCO medical directors to really understand what that pricing and utilization management could look like under the various development scenarios. And for those that may be less familiar with the U.S. healthcare system, I did want to provide a bit more perspective on the payers that we spoke to. So we were speaking to medical directors at managed care organizations. Managed care organizations really being one of 2 primary types of organizations, the other being pharmacy benefit organizations that are responsible for the facilitation of private health insurance, with private health insurance being the majority of coverage within the U.S. system. Now, individuals that are over the age of 65 will fall within Medicare But even for Medicare, quite a large portion of that is going to be managed through managed care organizations as well. So really wanted to speak to these individuals who will be responsible for the decision making when it comes to coverage of the therapeutic, the actual utilization management criteria that may be associated with the therapeutic at various price points, to really gain perspective on what the pricing could look like, again, under various development scenarios. Great. Well, with that, I did want to provide a bit of a summary as to the findings from the assessment of Zantrene, really starting first with the use of anthracyclines. Now, anthracyclines are going to be used across dozens of tumor types when considering both solid and liquid tumors. And despite the development of targeted therapeutics broadly within oncology, we still see the continued use of anthracyclines, really driven by the fact that they do have such strong clinical efficacy and potential survival benefits of these patients. Now, as I mentioned, they are associated with a number of different side effects. And in speaking with the oncologist, the overwhelming majority suggested that the number one concern for them really is the cardiotoxicity that can develop due to the cumulative use of anthracyclines over a patient's lifetime that could lead to cardiotoxic events down the road. So really suggesting that there's a large overall unmet need for a therapeutic that could help mitigate these cardiotoxic events. Which really is a nice lead into what we heard in terms of the potential adoption of Zantrene. Under the scenario in which we're assuming both cardioprotective benefits for Zantrene as well as anti-cancer benefits. Really, what we heard was that the overwhelming majority of patients that would require an anthracycline would be expected to be prescribed something like Zantrene. Again, being able to mitigate those cardiotoxic events, being able to optimize the actual regimen of the anthracyclines, and then providing additional survival benefits on top. So really expecting just overall widespread adoption. Now, in terms of the potential pricing for Zantrene, again, under the scenario in which we assume anti-cancer benefits associated with Zantrene, not surprisingly, what we heard from the managed care organizations was expectations for pricing in the range of $15,000 to $20,000 per month, very much in line with what we see for other similar novel therapeutics that have launched within the oncology space. And that, paired with the high expectations for overall adoption for those patients that require the use of anthracyclines, led to an overall estimate greater than $1.5 billion, even within breast cancer alone in the U.S. Globally, that could be greater than $3 billion for breast cancer alone. Now, additional upside does exist if we consider the use of or potential approvals for additional indications, both within solid and liquid tumors, as well as just the global opportunity for the use outside of breast cancer as well, leading to that $5 to $8 billion range that you see at the bottom of this slide. So large, substantial opportunity, both in terms of the overall use of the therapeutic as well as the pricing potential. Great. Well, with that, I did want to provide a bit more detail as to the findings from the commercial assessment associated with Zantrene. I'll first start by providing a bit more context as to the use of anthracyclines. So anthracyclines are used, as I mentioned, across dozens of tumor types, both in terms of the on-label use of anthracyclines as well as off-label use, covering, again, both solid and liquid tumors. Really driven by the fact that they are so highly effective as chemotherapeutic agents. Now, as I mentioned, and you'll see on the bottom left here, anthracyclines are associated with a number of different adverse events, including cardiotoxicity, alopecia, myelosuppression, etc. But despite these potential side effects of the use of anthracyclines, again, they continue to be used widely. Just to provide a bit more context as to the cardiotoxicity concerns, It really has been the potential for long-term cardiotoxic events that's led to the development of maximum lifetime cumulative doses that you'll see on the table on the bottom left, really wanting to limit the total volume of anthracyclines that a patient can be given over the course of their lifetime. And oftentimes these cumulative lifetime doses, based on what we heard from discussions with physicians, could have an impact on the optimal treatment regimen. So either reducing the overall dose, reducing the number of cycles that may have an impact on the long-term survival benefits of the use of anthracyclines. So again, really a large unmet need associated with the use of the products. Now, to provide a bit more context for some specific indications, you'll see on this slide 15, really the overall volume of patients that are receiving anthracyclines across both a select number of solid tumor types as well as liquid tumor types. I'll highlight here the large volume of breast cancer patients that are receiving anthracyclines. Over 75,000 patients on an annual basis are going to be treated with anthracyclines. But you'll see that there's a number of different indications in which thousands of patients are being prescribed anthracyclines across, again, the solid and liquid tumor types. So really an overall very large unmet need for something that could prevent cardiotoxic events in a number of different patient types. And to provide a bit more context as to the use of anthracyclines are used extremely widely within the U.S. Over 700,000 total prescriptions on an annual basis. But the U.S. really comprising approximately 5% of the total global prescription. So anthracyclines are used even more widely in Europe, in Asia, etc. So again, a large overall global opportunity for a therapeutic that could help mitigate some of the concerns associated with the use of anthracyclines. I alluded to this a bit earlier, but in the discussions with the oncologist, we did want to specifically ask, what are the most concerning side effects associated with the use of anthracyclines? And the vast majority of physicians suggested cardiotoxicity as the number one concern. Again, potentially having impact on how they're using anthracyclines, leading to less than optimal overall treatment decision making, reducing the number of cycles, etc. Now, before I get into more detail specifically around breast cancer, which really was the largest focus of the assessment, I wanted to provide a bit more context as to the actual prioritization process. We did start rather broadly in terms of selecting the indications for which Zantrene may provide the overall largest benefit. So we really did start with a large, broad list of potential indications and went through a stepwise approach of trying to determine where the greatest unmet need is, where could patients benefit the most from a product like Zantrene, really taking into account the overall number of anthracycline uses in a year, really taking into account specific feedback from those KOL discussions as to how are anthracyclines used today, how much of a need is there for a product that could mitigate those long-term effects, and in addition, really the trial feasibility for running a trial concomitantly with the use of anthracyclines for Zantrene. That ultimately led to the prioritization of a few different indications, most notably breast cancer, which will be the focus of the remainder of this presentation. Great. Well, I did want to provide a bit more context as to the use of anthracyclines, specifically within breast cancer. Now, breast cancer is typically going to be segmented into 4 different groups based on the hormone receptor status as well as the HER2 status. And really what we found specific to early stage or neoadjuvant and adjuvant therapy is that the use of anthracyclines is predominantly within the HER2 negative patient populations, those being triple negative breast cancer patients, comprising about 17% of all breast cancer patients, as well as hormone receptor positive HER2 negative patients, which is over 50%, closer to 60% of total breast cancer patients. So again, the use of anthracyclines, specifically as neoadjuvant therapeutics, is prevalent within these two specific subtypes. Now, getting into the use within the metastatic setting, what we heard from physicians is that anthracyclines are actually going to be used rather broadly across all four primary segments of breast cancer patients. Within the metastatic setting, typically going to be used closer to third or fourth line, depending upon the specific patient subtype, as well as the specific therapeutics that patient had received up until the point in which they're requiring an anthracycline. So again, relatively broad use of anthracyclines within the metastatic setting across all subtypes of breast cancer patients. Now, I did want to touch on the future use of anthracyclines. I mentioned earlier that it's really the clinical efficacy that's driven their continued use, despite the development of novel targeted therapeutics, even within specific forms of breast cancer. And you'll see that there is certainly a robust pipeline of therapeutics in development for breast cancer. But based on our discussions, based on our literature searches, really expecting there to be a continued use overall over the course of the next 10 years. We did forecast a 25% decline to account for the potential impacts of these novel therapeutics. But again, expecting there to be a large volume of anthracycline use down the road as well. Now, before I get into the specific findings as to the receptivity from stakeholders within the market as to the adoption and pricing of Zantrene, I did want to provide a bit of context as to Zantrene itself. So Zantrene is a small molecule. It has a long history of clinical efficacy that's been demonstrated as an oncology agent. There are multiple mechanisms of action, including being a chemotherapeutic, immune stimulating, and putative targeting. As I mentioned, the key features of Zantrene is the fact that it's been demonstrated to provide cardioprotective benefits to patients and potentially anthracycline-like activity to drive those anti-cancer benefits. So again, there is data to support the use of the product, specifically within relapsed refractory AML, that demonstrated a 40% clinical response rate. That was back in 2020. And there's also historical efficacy associated with it within breast cancer, ovarian, and a range of different leukemias. Now, in terms of the market research that we had conducted with oncologists as well as payers, there were really three different development scenarios that inform target product profiles, or what we would call target product profiles, which really reflect expectations for what a product's label could look like following its approval. So again, there were really three different scenarios which we tested. The first being a cardioprotection only scenario. So Zantrene as a more of a supportive care therapeutic that's providing that cardioprotective benefits alongside the concomitant use of anthracyclines. The other two scenarios that we had tested assumed that there was additional anti-cancer activity associated with the use of Zantrene. So under the first scenario, within the metastatic setting, assuming an incremental 2-month improvement in the median progression-free survival, in the high anti-cancer efficacy scenario, assuming a 4-month improvement in the median progression-free survival as well. And it's worth noting this was double-blinded research. So while I'll refer to this as a Zantrene adoption and pricing, in the context of the discussions themselves with these stakeholders, it was blinded. We referred to Zantrene as Product X. Now, getting into the detailed findings in terms of the discussions with physicians for Zantrene as a cardioprotective therapeutic, we really did receive high favorability for the product, both within the metastatic and neoadjuvant settings, really highlighting the fact that this could provide long-term benefits, particularly for those patients within the neoadjuvant setting, because this is a setting for which they are looking for a cure for these patients. These patients are expected to live long lives. Being able to provide those long-term cardiotoxic prevention measures for those patients in particular is a strong benefit that was seen from these physicians. And you'll see that reflected here on slide 25 related to the adoption of Product X. So this is reflecting the percentage of patients that physicians would expect to prescribe Zantrene for those patients that are requiring the use of an anthracycline who are anthracycline naive. So in those cases that patients are expected to require an anthracycline, the majority of patients were expected to be prescribed something like Zantrene. Again, a slightly higher proportion of patients expected within that neoadjuvant setting, because those are healthier patients, because they are looking for cure and could benefit even more from the long-term benefits of the use of Zantrene. Now, in terms of the overall receptivity to Zantrene as a cardioprotective and anti-cancer agent, so this is associated with the 2-month or 4-month progression-free survival, very highly favorable from a physician perspective, an average rating of close to 6.5 out of 7, which, from conducting a lot of these sorts of assessments, a 6.5 really is a very favorable outcome when it comes to the reactions from physician stakeholders. And what we had heard in terms of the overall adoption here on slide 27 is, in this scenario in which we're providing both anti-cancer benefits as well as cardioprotective benefits, physicians really expected to use it in nearly every situation in which an anthracycline is required today. So, those target patient populations that are going to be using an anthracycline, physicians felt it was a benefit to the patient to prescribe this in nearly every single scenario. Now, in terms of the discussions with the payers, I'll break this into their reactions for the development scenario as a cardioprotective only agent, which is reflected in blue on this slide, as well as the cardioprotective and anti-cancer scenarios, which are reflected in orange on this slide. So in the scenario in which Zantrene is able to demonstrate cardioprotection only, the physicians, perhaps not surprisingly, expected the product to be priced in that $2,000 to $5,000 range, really in line with where supportive care agents are today. Products like Neupogen or Neulasta, Cosela, that are providing supportive care benefits to these patients. So again, $2,000 to $5,000 per cycle or per month were their expectations under that scenario. Now, under the scenario in which Zantrene is able to demonstrate anti-cancer activity, that really did change the paradigm or the thinking of these payers in terms of how they would expect the product to be priced, really expecting the product to really fall within the broad class of oncolytics, which in the US is a protected class of therapies, which are typically not closely managed. Typically within oncology in the US, the payers allow the physicians to use their own discretion as to what's appropriate for these patients, allow them to decide what products are going to provide the greatest survival benefits for these cancer patients. And their expectations, again, were very much in line with where anti-cancer products, oncolytics, have been priced recently, novel therapeutics that have launched in the last 5 years, typically being priced in that $15,000 to $20,000 per cycle or per month range. So the development scenario having a relatively large impact on how the product would perceive, what sort of class or group of medications payers would typically associate with them with. that would impact their overall expectations for pricing and management. Before I get into the actual forecast numbers, I did want to provide some context as to some of the structure of the forecast and high-level statistics that are really driving the revenue numbers that I'll show in a moment here. But starting at the top, overall, just under 300,000 breast cancer patients in the U.S. on an incident basis. Approximately 80,000 of those, or about 30% of those, will be treated with an anthracycline in any given year. Now, bolting on the physician adoption in terms of the expectations, again, a bit of a difference between the cardioprotection versus the cardioprotection and anti-cancer scenario, but in the range of 15 to 25% of those patients, or overall patients, closer to 60 to 95% of patients requiring the use of an anthracycline expected to be treated with Zantrene down the road. Now, it is worth noting we did take a standard preference share adjustment of 50% and applied that to the forecast. So taking the physician adoption rates that we had heard in the market research, that 60 to 95% range, and applying that 50% cut. That's what's going to be driving the revenue figures, again, that you'll see on the subsequent slides. In addition, we did take into account sales force reach, so an additional 20% cut in terms of the overall adoption of the product. And then in terms of the actual pricing that's applied within these models, $4,000 for the cardioprotection scenario and $15,000 for the anti-cancer scenario. Again, there being potential upside in terms of the pricing under that scenario. So you'll see here on the left-hand portion of this slide, within breast cancer alone, within the U.S. alone, the overall opportunity as a cardioprotective agent, approaching $300 million overall. And then under the scenario in which the product is able to demonstrate those anti-cancer benefits, really having a drastic impact both from a pricing and adoption standpoint, leading to the overall estimate of greater than $1.5 billion in opportunity, again, within breast cancer alone and within the U.S. alone. And I will talk about the overall opportunity outside of breast cancer and within other geographies in a moment here, but I did want to provide some perspective as to some of the sensitivities associated with the model. Of course, the overall net price increases in any of these types of models is going to have a large impact on the expectations. Base case, we assume 3% net price increase. If you assumed a 0% increase or 6% increase, that could have a $500 million, $600 million overall impact on the opportunity within that anti-cancer scenario. Now, the second sensitivity here, I do want to provide a bit more context to. I mentioned earlier that the concerns with cardiotoxicity actually could have an impact on the optimal regimen that's used for these patients, really reducing the number of cycles for anthracyclines. And what we had heard from physician research was if Zantrene is able to provide those protective benefit, that allows for potentially opening up the door for extending the overall treatment regimen, potentially increasing the number of overall cycles of anthracyclines that are being used, which have a direct impact on the number of cycles of Zantrene that is being used. So you'll see, again, a 50% overall upside in terms of the use of Zantrene as a anti-cancer and cardioprotective therapeutic. The last row, I'll provide some context as well. I mentioned earlier, we assumed a 25% decline in the overall use of anthracyclines within breast cancer. We did want to provide some sensitivity analysis, whether that's a 15% decline over the next 10 years or whether that's a 35% decline over the next 10 years, really having a $200 to $300 million impact overall on that anti-cancer scenario within breast cancer. Now, again, to provide some perspectives on the opportunity outside of breast cancer and outside the U.S., I'll first focus on the left-hand portion of this slide, which is, again, the cardioprotection only scenario. Assuming use or approval within additional indications such as endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, sarcomas, other liquid tumor types, we're assuming that could represent an additional $300 to $400 million in overall opportunity. That being driven directly by the volume of anthracycline use within each of these markets. Now, outside the U.S., we are assuming there's marginal upside as well within the range of $200 to $300 million. I think there may be potential additional upside there because the use of anthracyclines is so much more prevalent outside the U.S. Again, 95% of total anthracycline volume is outside of the U.S. So again, substantial additional upside, taking into account additional indications, taking into account the global opportunity for the cardioprotection only scenario, total opportunity in the range of $1 billion. Now, similar approach for estimating the opportunity for the anti-cancer scenario. Again, the widespread use of anthracyclines within gynecologic cancers, within sarcomas, liquid tumors, etc., lead to the expectations for an additional $1 to $2.5 billion in overall use, outside of breast cancer, and then in terms of the overall global opportunity on top of that, taking a look at analog therapeutics that are anti-cancer products, taking a look at their revenues segmented by geography, we typically find that oncology therapeutics garner about 50% of their revenue within the U.S., about 50% of their revenue outside the U.S., leading to an additional $2 to $4 billion in overall ex-U.S. opportunity, which cumulatively results in an overall opportunity for Zantrene in the range of $5 to $8 billion overall. So with that, I did want to provide just another quick summary of the findings from the research. Again, anthracyclines are used very prevalently across dozens of different tumor types. It really is the overall efficacy of these therapeutics, the survival benefits that they're able to provide to these patients that have driven their continued use despite some of the side effects that are associated with them. And in relation to those side effects, widely heard from these physicians that the greatest unmet need associated with the use of anthracyclines is a product that could help to mitigate the cardiotoxicity concerns that could lead to more optimal treatment regimens, that could lead to better long-term outcomes for these patients in terms of their overall survival. And along those same lines, in reaction to the product profile in which Zantrene's providing with cardioprotective benefits and anti-cancer activity, the oncologists really did suggest that they would expect to use the product in the vast majority of patients that are requiring the use of an anthracycline within their treatment regimen. So again, widespread expected adoption for Zantrene under that development scenario. And in terms of pricing, again, given this product would fall within the class of oncolytics, would expect the product to be priced similarly to more recent novel targeted therapeutics that have been developed in that range of $15,000 to $20,000 overall, which led to the overall expected value within breast cancer in the U.S. of greater than $1.5 billion, globally for breast cancer greater than $3 billion, and just cumulatively across different indication types, cancer types, as well as all geographies, really leading to that overall range of $5 to $8 billion.